All right, hello anatomy students. This is the model of the spinal cord that we have here in the lab. We're just going to go through all of the components in the lab manual that we are having you responsible for knowing. It's going to be on page 59. Here we have the lab manual. So we're just below the multipolar neuron section, spinal cord. We're going to talk about all these structures right here that you're responsible for seeing on the model. So let's look at the model now. First of all, we need to orient ourselves. Where's the superior side? Where's the inferior side? Where's the posterior side, anterior side? So this is a cervical vertebra, all this bone right here. And here's the bifid spinous process. So this is the posterior side, which, just by process of elimination, this is the anterior side then. Another way you can figure this out, this is a superior view because we're having the superior articulating faucets. Also, the bifid process kind of is pointing slightly down, and all the processes on the vertebra are pointing down. That's one way that I happen to do it. Okay, so now we're looking at the spinal cord in here. And another way to tell what's anterior and what is posterior is you have to look at this anterior median fissure. See, it's like this empty little space right here that goes all the way down to this central commissure right here. And then the other side, you'll have the posterior medium sulcus. You notice there's not as much space. This is way more prominent of a feature on the spinal cord. And when you see that in comparison to the other side on the spinal cord, then you can be sure that this is the anterior median sulcus. And then you can orient yourself as this is the anterior side, this is the posterior side. And that's very important because a lot of these horns in the gray matter and the columns in the white matter, you need to know if it's an anterior one or it's anterior horn or a posterior horn or lateral horn. So all of this kind of orange, tannish part right here are the cell bodies of neurons in the spinal cord. They're unmyelinated. When their axons go out of this area right here of the horns, they're going to this white area. Then their axons become myelinated by Schwann cells, if you remember. So let's go over the horns. So this would be your gray matter, and you have many different horns. You have the posterior horn or the dorsal horn. You have the anterior or ventral horn. Then you have the lateral horns. Okay? This is all your gray matter. Then you have the gray commissure right here, or commissure, that's connecting the two parts of the gray matter on either side of the spinal cord. And you see there's a central canal lined by epidermal cells right there in the center of the gray commissure. There's multipolar neurons in this gray matter. So review the models of the multipolar neurons to know how those are supposed to look. And also I'll be doing a video on a slide of a multipolar neuron, but we're not going to be able to see this in this model. So let's now look at the white matter outside the horns. You have the posterior funiculi right here, okay? Or you can call this the posterior column. And this will have a function you need to look up. We want you guys to do a little bit of the legwork. Then you have the lateral funiculi or lateral columns on either side. Then you have the anterior funiculi, or you can also call them the anterior columns. Okay, then let's just talk about some of the extra structures you might want to know about for this model that aren't necessarily on this list, but are hit up in other parts, like in other slides that we're going to have to look at. So first of all, we're going to have the different meningeal layers. So we have the pia mater right here. It's this connective tissue layer right outside the spinal cord. Then you'll have the arachnoid space right here. Then you'll have the arachnoid mater right here, just on the other side. And this arachnoid space in between the pia mater and the arachnoid mater is where your cerebral spinal fluid will fill. I'll fill this up and it'll go all the way up until the cranial cavity. And then when we get to the brain, we'll show you where it's going to end, basically into your ventricles. We'll have another model in the ventricles as well. This space right here is the subdural space, a brown line. Then you'll have the first layer of your dura mater. This is the meningeal layer of your dura mater. Then you'll have the epidural space right here. So someone's giving birth and they're getting an epidural, the doctor will give the pain medication in this epidural space right here. Kind of numbs everything below that area. Then you have another layer of your dura mater called the periosteal dura mater, layer of the dura mater. Dura mater is always two different layers, and those two different layers can form these spaces, like when we learned about the superior sagittal sinus, and we're going to learn about the sigmoid sinus. All those sinuses have to do with a separation of these two dura mater layers. Let's go into some of the nerves on this model. You have some rootlets that will come out here out of the posterior gray horn, and they'll be dealing with sensation. So if you're getting a sensation out here that's coming in to the posterior gray horn, there'll be some impulses for your peripheral sensation nerve receptors and going down these axons. So that's the rootlets, and they'll eventually form a posterior root right here, or number 18. Then you'll have if I move this over, the dorsal root ganglion a little bit farther down. We have a lot of unipolar neurons in there, so that's something you want to keep in mind. And then if we go to the anterior horn here, you have more rootlets coming out to form a root, number 77 here. So this would be your anterior or ventral root. Then you're going to have some of these vessels. These are actually some vertebral vessels coming through the transverse foramina. Then you're going to have some rami. You have the anterior ramus right here. You're going to have your gray ramus communicans. And this is something you're going to need to know. It's part of your sympathetic trunk ganglia. Notice how it's very close to the spinal cord. It's part of the autonomic nervous system. So this is your sympathetic trunk ganglia. So keep that in mind for this model as well. And then you just have a posterior ramus right here. So posterior and anterior ramus or rami. Let's see if that's everything that I need to cover here real quick. Looks like we got everything. So I will also have an answer key for this model on my website as well. So you can review this video and then look at the answer key from then on to remind yourself of what I said. And I'll see you in the next video. I also wanted to mention that the denticulate ligaments are located right here, just on the lateral sides of the spinal cord. Denticulate ligaments.